Well, welcome to Focus Gaming News, and today we're speaking to Ian Smith, the Integrity Commissioner at the Esports Integrity Commission, ESIC. Welcome, Ian. Thanks for joining us today. How are things there?
Thanks very much, Joe. It's great to be here. It's a little bit dull outside, but we've had such a wonderful run of good weather that it's not been the worst time to be locked down.
That's it. One saving grace. It's been a good summer there in the UK. Well, just to set the scene a little bit, for those viewers who aren't familiar with the ESIC's work and what you do at the Commission, do you want to tell us a little bit about the history from when you were established in 2015 up to today, who members are, and a little bit about what the Commission does?
Yeah, sure. This all began as an integrity threat assessment back in 2015. I've been in sports law for many, many years, but in traditional sport. And I had a background in corruption or anti-corruption work, integrity-related work in cricket, but also in other sports. And I was commissioned back in the summer of 2015 to do an integrity threat of the esports industry, which was particularly interesting because although I was a gamer literally all my life, I'm going back to, the mid-70s when I was playing Pac-Man on an arcade machine, I wasn't very familiar with the esports world. I simply knew it existed. And so I had a sort of 3-month deep dive into this industry where I understood the integrity elements, but I didn't understand the industry itself. And so it was a fascinating period for me, which resulted in a fairly standard industry threat assessment. But the trouble was that there was nowhere to go with it. And this is the interesting thing. If you had done the same thing in traditional sport, let's say you did it in rugby, you would take it to the RFU or World Rugby. If you did it in football, you'd go to FIFA or UEFA or the FA and so on. But in esport, there was nowhere to go. No central authority, no governing body, nothing. There was just all the series of game verticals, 20 to 30 esport titles that were in the hands of tournament organizers, some publishers. It was a completely chaotic scene. And so what I did was suggest that the answer was to create a body, a voluntary regulatory body, to create some coherence with respect to integrity in the esports industry. I expected that to be done by somebody else. I thought I would go back to my world in traditional sport, but I was then asked by MTG, who had originally commissioned the report, if I would do that, and I did. Again, thinking that I would hand over the result of that to somebody within the esports industry. But the truth is, I just got into it. It was an irresistible challenge to somebody like me who'd been in sport for so many years and spent so much of my time moaning about how sport was run, to have somebody say, okay, well, then you do it. You're such a smart ass, you get on with it. And here I am 5 years later, still very, very much enjoying it. Not necessarily on a game-by-game basis, but the community and the industry is really vibrant. Things move very, very quickly. It's full of nice, interesting people. And the fact that it contains many different games of many different kinds means that it's always interesting. And so what ESIC is a members association. Technically, we're a company limited by guarantee, which means we're owned by our members. Nobody has equity, not me, not anybody in ESIC, because we're an integrity body. And I felt that if somebody could buy or sell us, that would undermine the purpose of our existence. And so I created it very specifically to be a members association. And what that means is that the members pay us an annual subscription based on size. And in return, we provide services to them as members. And those services are primarily a set of regulations that govern integrity issues, cheating, but primarily they revolve around betting. So we sit in that gap between esports and betting on esports. And so we provide regulations for participants in esports that govern that. But those codes that are voluntarily implemented by our members also give us jurisdiction to investigate, prosecute, and sanction breaches of those codes. And so we're a lot like the integrity bodies that exist in traditional sport, except that our link to the participants is by contract. So when they, for example, we have members like ESL or DreamHack or Blast Premier or LVP, various tournament organizers. When a player or a team agrees to play in those events, they agree that that event is covered by the ESIC code, and that gives us, as the regulator, voluntary regulator, jurisdiction to watch over those tournaments, to determine if there's been breaches, and to investigate and sanction those participants. So our jurisdiction is based on contract rather than governance registration, but the outcome is the same.
Mm-hmm. And how have you been seeing that membership base grow? Is the awareness of ESIC's work growing, and more members are joining?
Sure. I mean, it's been a slow but steady increase, and we were very fortunate that our first and founding members were ESL and DreamHack or ESL certainly was and is the world's biggest esports tournament operator. And so we were lucky to start at the top of the pyramid. And then we've also been very, very fortunate in attracting membership from the likes of Blast Premier. So very, very much top-end competition. And then that has resulted in, say, smaller tournament organizers and people focused on different games coming into membership. It's frustratingly slow. I'm not going to pretend that just because we exist, we've got everybody banging on our door to join, because we have two categories of membership. And on the one side is the tournament organizers and eSport. We call that the eSport side. So publishers, eSport stakeholders, where, as I say, we've been lucky to start at the top, but expanding that has been a slow but steady process. And there's still a long way to go. There's a lot of tournament organizers who are not engaged with ESIC. So I think from a betting perspective, we probably cover about 50 to 60% of the markets within our membership, but that leaves a big, big chunk that is currently unregulated and ungoverned, or at least by us, and largely by nothing else, because there's nothing else in the space. But our other class of member are the betting operators or people in the betting space. And that's based on information sharing memorandums of understanding, where in effect we operate as a hub for suspicious and unusual betting alerts for the esports industry. So if you're familiar with what the IBIA does for sports betting, generally in Europe, although they've recently become international, we do the same, but very specifically with esports. And we work with IBIA, with the Global Lotteries Monitoring Service, with the various data companies. So and very importantly, directly with those regulators, both in American states and country regulators like the United Kingdom Gambling Commission or the Maltese Gaming Authority, to try and create a truly meaningful and forceful global network aimed at combating betting fraud through match fixing. And so those are our two classes of membership. And on the betting side, the growth is very, very rapid, because people in the betting industry understand what we're doing immediately. It doesn't require any explanation, right? We're trying to create or maintain integrity, which for 99% of betting operators is absolutely key to their profitability and margins, right? It's their money that is stolen by match fixers and betting fraudsters. So they have a key interest, and they recognize it straight away, and they either join or they don't join. But we've got a list of new people joining. So that's a vibrant part of what we do. It's slower on the esports side because there's a lot of misunderstanding within the esports industry about what the existence of betting means to esport, what the threat really is, and what to do about it. And so that's much, you know, to get an esports member into ESIC takes hours and hours and hours of explanation and negotiation. With the betting members, it's about half an hour, and it's like, yes, we're in, or no, we're not, because it's far, far simpler on that side of what we do.
It's well, as you say, it's a very varied sector with a phenomenal range of different types of games. A very young sector, as you mentioned, a lot of young energy. How likely do you think it is that we'll start to see a kind of globally recognized standards in esports?
Yeah, I don't think we're far off. It kind of depends on where you focus your energy, right? And I think this is there's a lot of people who come from the traditional sports world and look at esports or come into esports with a view that you could provide a governance structure that resembles traditional sport, a kind of a FIFA or an IOC or something like that. And that's not realistic. That isn't how the industry works, because unlike many traditional sports, all the games are owned by somebody, right? They're owned by a publisher or developer who can do what they like with that game. They can choose who they do business with, who they don't do, how their scene develops. And so what I've focused on, of course, as ESIC, very firmly on just dealing with the integrity issues, because those are common whether you're a small niche gaming community, let's say Rocket League or Super Smash Bros. Or Tekken or whatever, or you're Counter-Strike, League of Legends, or Dota 2 at the other end with millions and millions and millions, gigantic, well-developed esports scene. But integrity is necessary for that whole range, right? So it's a perfect place for there to be consistent and coherent regulations covering everybody. On the other hand, how to run a league or a tournament or a match or an activation is going to differ from game to game, from country to country. Nobody needs to interfere in that. That's a commercial business. So I think there are only 3 areas of common governance or regulation or standards needed in the esports industry. And that's integrity. It's obvious. I think youth protection is another obvious area, because we do skew young, particularly in our spectator gamer demographic. Not so much at the professional player participant end, because those guys have to have put in their 10,000 hours, right? They are that good. They've Malcolm Gladwelled the hell out of this thing. They are as good at what they do in video games as Ronaldo is good at football, right? And if you think differently, you're missing the point completely. These guys are absolute top end. And you can't reach that by the age of 16, 17, right? You can, but it's very, very rare. But we have to admit that our spectator, our participant demographic runs young. And so youth protection should be a top priority that is common across that sector. But it also overlaps with gaming, with entertainment. You know, it's a complicated area. And the third is live event safety, because that has to be key, whether you're 50 guys in a bar in Denver or 50,000 in the bird's nest watching the finals of League of Legends World Championship, right? Those are common issues. But the integrity space needs to be taken a lot more seriously, because I think the nature of the problem is that you've got West Coast American publishers who are very new to the concept of sports betting. And it's their games that have the most betting. You know, it's Counter-Strike by miles, more than 40% of the market, Dota 2 with more than 20% of the market, and League of Legends with 10 to 12% of the market. So you've got 3 games making up 80% of what goes on in the betting space. And all of those publishers are West Coast American publishers with an antipathy towards betting on their game, right? So there's a long way to go in that direction for the issue of integrity to be taken seriously. And that that's what we're here to do, and we continue our quest to do it.
I was going to ask you, what do you see as the similarities and the differences in integrity issues between traditional sports and esports? I suppose it sounds like that approach, the sort of willingness of the publishers is one of the major differences.
Yeah, look, it is absolutely, but in many ways, the integrity issues faced by esports, the existence of esports betting, are the same as the integrity issues faced by traditional sports and betting on traditional sports. And in many ways, there's an advantage in esports because we're a digital product, right? So there's an immutable record of everything that happens in a game. So it's not like we're watching a game of rugby where there can be a difference of opinion about whether something, an element of alleged underperformance was underperformance or was just bad play. And this is the thing you're always going to get in traditional sport is you can say, for example, that somebody bowled a no ball to order in order to commit betting fraud in cricket. But you could also find 20 experts that say that every bowler in the world bowls a no ball from time to time, and therefore it wasn't deliberate, it was just accidental or bad play. Now, that's true to some extent in esports, where somebody can just say, I made a mistake. But we've got, direct digital, irrefutable evidence that, for example, a particular player does X 99% of the time in this circumstance, but in this game where the betting indicates that there was a fix, he did Y. It's good corroborating evidence. So in some ways, esports is easier to deal with from an integrity, or at least from a match fixing allegation point of view. But you do have this problem of trying to sometimes deal with this issue against the background of no regulation or no rules or no education of the player or no will on the part of the publisher or the tournament organizer to actually address the problem. And this becomes very much a regional or jurisdictional thing. So if you raise an alleged match fixing query with, for example, a Chinese tournament operator, by far the most likely response is they will totally ignore you. In some cases, they will actually threaten you with legal action if you go public with these allegations. That's happened to me multiple times. I'll said, look, here's good evidence that a match was fixed in your league. And if I get a response, which is rare, right, because they just do not want to know, but if I get a response, it's often the opposite of what you'd expect, which is, no, you're wrong about this. We've spoken to the team and they say they didn't fix it. And if you say they did, we're going to sue you. So, that's the sort of thing we're facing with the lack of a central authority in all of this. And which is why there's much more work to be done here, because we don't have a FIFA, we don't have an IOC to enforce this on their less than compliant members. And in fact, tournament organizers are not members of anything, right? The only thing they're members of is ESIC. There is no other body that say a group of tournament organizers worldwide are members of. We are it.
Would you welcome the creation of such a body? Is there a place for that? Would it work?
Look, even if it was practical, I think it very, very much depends on who is setting it up. I mean, we've seen this latest effort at a world governing body by the Global Esports Federation based out of Hong Kong, but it's effectively being bankrolled by Tencent. Now, Tencent are a major player, of course. They've got fingers in multiple publisher developer pies and a massive stake in Riot, therefore League of Legends, and then Valorant coming, but also PUBG and so on. But and that's cool, but it does mean that every other publisher is not going to touch it with a barge pole, right? Because they're all in competition with each other. There's enormous suspicion amongst all of these companies. They're rivals. They're not cooperating in any sense, in any way, in the esports space. And so it's hard to imagine how that could happen outside of a more neutral body like ours, where we're game agnostic, party agnostic. We have a code of ethics about dealing with how our members have to interact with each other, but we recognize that they're in competition with each other. So we just deal with the common areas where there's no competition, right? Everybody wants integrity. You would think everybody wants youth protection, everybody wants live event safety. So I think these are things that can be provided neutrally. Anything that goes on to say, if you want to run an esports tournament, you've got to do this, 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 and this, like licensing conditions, or you've got to fulfill these criteria, that's going to be a serious struggle, because why should they, right? Where's the incentive? These are businesses for profit. There are some that will pretend that they have a mission beyond that, but that's garbage. They exist to make money, right? They're not like FIFA, which supposedly, I know it exists to make money, but in theory, it exists to promote the game of football, right? Riot doesn't exist for any other reason than to promote the game of League of Legends and make money. and if you pretend otherwise, you're an idiot.
Well, you mentioned on the betting side, what sort of response have you seen from regulators? You mentioned working with the Malta Gaming Authority. Have you seen that gaming regulators are prepared? Are they sort of aware of the emergence of esports betting?
Oh, look, some are and some aren't. There's some who have gone to great pains to educate themselves, and I would pick out UKGC approached us very early on, and we've educated them and we work very closely with the Sports Betting Integrity Unit, and they've been enormously helpful. Similarly, the Maltese Gaming Authority, the Isle of Man has been very good. Nevada has been excellent. I mean, literally from day one, the Gambling Control Board, GCB, has been a phenomenal partner for us. And to some extent, the New Jersey Directorate of Gaming Authority have been really good. Others, and some states are still proactively educating themselves, and we're engaging with them. But many of the US states, as they open up to sports betting, remain in complete ignorance about what esports is and what to do about it. But that's, again, I understand that, because they're in complete ignorance about sports betting. Never mind esports, which is just like complicated, right? But there are a ton of regulatory authorities and jurisdictions that are, I would say, not actively avoiding us, but certainly not engaging with us. If you look at a jurisdiction like Curacao, they don't want to start getting heavy about licensing it, because their economy is the licensing of gambling operators, and so anything that might hamper the steady flow of new registrations for sub-licenses in Curacao is not going to be seen as a good thing, right? They're not putting barriers up, because their entire economy is dependent on this flow, and so it's very, very patchy. The state of Victoria, for example, amazing in Australia. We've had some good engagement recently with New South Wales. With the Northern Territories are coming to the party slowly, but we've had nothing from Western Australia, for example. I'm not a big fan of this jurisdiction-based approach to gambling regulation, as you can probably tell. I mean, primarily for the reason that gambling is not jurisdictionally based, right? It's a global activity. This idea that you can control it in jurisdictions, especially at a state level, state by state in Australia or America, it's delusional, right? Gambling doesn't work that way. You can have an English company offering markets on a game that's been played in Russia that has participants from Peru being run out of a data center in Guernsey, that, where, it's absurd to think that you can control that from on a jurisdictional basis. We need international cooperation, but I can't see that coming anywhere because, you know, China can't even legalize and regulate betting, and it's the biggest betting country in the world by miles. India won't legalize and regulate sports betting, despite the fact that 200 million Indians bet on a regular basis. We've got a decade of common sense due in the gambling space. Until then, we just muddle along. Yeah.
It's well, just finally, it's the pandemic has in a way given something of a boost to betting on esports with the absence of traditional sporting events. Do you think it's a sector that's going to remain a sort of niche, or is it going to continue to grow? Is it going to become more mainstream, do you think?
Yeah, look, I think the fact that we've been the only show in town since about February has been a massive boost. But I think there are two types of boost available here. There are new fans who have come to existing esports properties, either through betting or just through TV media. A lot has been driven by betting. It's done a great job because sports bettors with nothing to bet on have migrated to stuff they previously knew nothing about. So I think that those who have migrated to the traditional esports titles like Counter-Strike, Dota, and League of Legends, although I think it's going to be much more first-person shooter based because the MOBA games are so hard to understand that I don't think casual fans have come from, say, betting on tennis and football into League of Legends or Dota because they're too hard to understand, right? You have to have played them for hundreds of hours before you know enough about them. But Counter-Strike or Rainbow Six or Valorant or even Overwatch are easier, and therefore they've attracted new fans both as fans and as bettors. And I think those guys are going to stay because they're quite compelling products. You know, Counter-Strike is a great game. It's an experience. The other side of that is that a lot of sports simulators like FIFA, Pro Evo Soccer, NBA 2K, Madden, these sort of games have attracted interest because the real thing was not available. As soon as the real thing is available again, those guys are gone. The idea that, I mean, look, if the industry, both from a betting and an esports perspective, can retain 10% of those guys, it will be a triumph. The reality is, as soon as the real thing's available, they're going back to the real thing. If you can watch Manchester United versus Arsenal, you're not going to watch Joe Bloggs play Joe Bloggs 2 in FIFA. I'm sorry, you're just not. It's just not that good a product. None of the sports simulators are because their viewing, their broadcast mode is rubbish. You know, they're hard to watch relative to the real thing, and the passion is hard to engage. So, you know, again, it's a good betting product for sure. So if you can retain 10% of that 90-odd% growth we've seen in betting on FIFA, for example, fantastic. Great for everybody, esports and for betting. But, you know, I can't see it being more than 10%. I think 10% would be amazing. I think it's going to be more like single figures. But okay. Yeah, COVID's had an amazing impact on esports. And if people take what they've learned and the growth into the new normal post-COVID, esports will be in a much better place than it was pre-COVID. So great. You know, at least there's something nice has arisen out of this horrendous pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's certainly an interesting time, and yeah, that's one thing that we can take from it. Well, Ian, thank you very much for great insights. From you certainly have a huge amount of knowledge on the sector, and that's really useful for a lot of people who still, like you say, don't have that much awareness of how esports works, and both on the esports side and from the betting operators. So thank you for your time, and we'll hope to speak to you again in the future and see how things have developed.
Well, thanks very much. It was good fun.
Okay, Ian, thank you.